All right, we are live. Hey everyone, welcome back to another Seattle Data Guy Night live on Monday. Hopefully you're all doing well. With me today is Joe and Matt. How are you guys doing this evening?
Doing good. How are you?
Great. How about you, Matt?
Doing all right. Yeah.
All right.
Feels like we're finally getting some more decent weather right now. Don't know what it's been like in Denver, but
Yeah, it's been cooling down. It was really hot. I think up until like 2 days ago, it was very hot. But then it's cooled down. It's been nice.
Yeah, we get
it's like
the
fall.
nice. I think we're getting some of that tropical storm California is getting pretty soon. So I think as soon as tomorrow. So that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people in my audience probably know who you guys are. But do you guys have a quick background you usually give about yourselves?
Hey, Matt, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. We're the co-authors of Fundamentals of Data Engineering and available through O'Reilly Media. That's kind of our big thing recently. That was a year and a half of work, which we wrapped up, and we're pretty excited to see the reception to that. We're also co-founders of Ternary Data, and so we focus on solving data engineering problems and on training data engineers as well. So.
Yeah. I'm Joe, big Web3 influencer, blockchain enthusiast. I'm just joking, but it's good to see everybody.
Nice. You have no connections to Web3 at all, or you're not playing at all in the space?
No, not at the moment. I would say I nothing I can talk about. We do have some clients that I would say are involved in that kind of stuff. So it's kind of interesting seeing it from the sidelines. But yeah, I can't say that Ternary is a Web3 crypto company. But
I mean,
you never
know.
No, not yet. Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
So
I'll look out for the NFTs. Just like some excerpts of the book or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
by a paragraph.
Nice. Well, usually I kind of start off the conversation trying to be like not data, because I feel like even when I'm like off by myself talking to data people, we always end up talking about something like Snowflake or Databricks. So talking away from that, what do you guys do when you're not doing data things? Feel free to whoever start first, I guess. Matt, maybe?
That's a good question. I feel like my whole not data things life got disrupted pretty badly with COVID, and so I'm trying to get back to it at some point. So, yeah, pretty into the arts, I would say. Definitely like to be involved in film and such. I went to like Sundance Film Festival right before everything locked down, and I'm looking forward to kind of like getting back to those things. I mean, I know there's been some resumption, but it's been pretty slow, and then travel as well. In fact, Joe, you recently traveled to New York City, right, and engaged in a few things there. So
yeah, pop off New York, fun place. Shout out to the New York crew. You know who you are, so. Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it feels like, traveling these days, it's in some ways it's back to normal. In other ways, it's quite crazier than ever. Just it's like people forgot how to fly, but they also forgot etiquette. So you kind of mix two things together, and it's pretty much what you'd see on TikTok a lot. So it's awesome. Just people are nuts these days, but it is what it is. Yeah, Matt, I think that Sundance event, the 2020 one, that was like one of the big super spreader events for COVID, actually. Yeah. No, they traced it to it. It was actually one of the big ones for the States. Yeah.
I actually didn't get sick right around then, as far as I know, but maybe I just like transmitted it to someone else or something.
Probably. Yeah.
It's like that in the Snowflake Summit.
Snowflake Summit was a big one. Everyone who went there, so you went there, right?
I went there, and then like everyone I talked to like afterwards on Twitter was like, I have COVID.
Did you get it?
I did not. I was so lucky, like, because like one, talked to everyone there that basically got COVID, and then went home and talked to my girlfriend, and she like gone to a concert the night before, and she's like, oh, I feel like I was shouting too loud, and so I feel a little bit sick. Or she felt like her voice was a little bit whatever. And the next day she's like, I have COVID. And then I was like, man, I'm just like sitting here bobbing and weaving COVID left and right.
Good for you. Yeah, I was actually we were supposed to be on the same panel, I think, and at the last second, my plane got canceled. So I couldn't make it down, which, for better or for worse, but you might have traded up with Lauren in my place anyway. So
yeah, it was a fun panel. I forgot how awkward it is to like talk in front of people, because like it's been like 2 years since I've talked in front of people, and Like I honestly said like 50 words, and I was like, I feel so weird being in front of people and like being expected to talk. Like this is such a different experience. It's been a while. So yeah,
I know what you mean though, because like it was the Snowflake Data for Breakfast. We sponsored that in Salt Lake City back in March, and I remember getting up on stage, and it was something like 250 people or something like that. But it was weird because I'm usually not, it doesn't really jar me to be on stage. But I was like, it feels kind of weird. There's like people and there's a mic and what's going on here. It's you pick it up though, because you kind of have to. So
yeah, you do pick it up, but it definitely caught me. It was definitely one of those things where it's like,
yeah, for sure. Were you like were you stumbling over your words, or were you articulate?
I think it was a combination of like stumbling over my words and then just realizing the fact that I was in front of live people, right? Like obviously I'm in front of live people now, but it's like very disconnected. Whereas like there, it's like, oh, all these people are staring at me. This is a like old experience, but a new experience at the same time. It's just.
Did you speak 50 words because that's all you had to say, or because they were like, Ben, we'll pass the mic past him. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
I mean, it's a combination of all I had to say. Like there was definitely a lot of like, there was like also too many. Personally, there was just too many people on that panel. I think there was like 7
There was
or
8
a
lot of people on that panel.
There was just too many people on a panel. I think. Like how much are you supposed to say in like an hour when there's 7 other people on a panel? It's like. And they all have, their own messages they want to talk about.
Well, yeah, Tab on there. So that guy alone makes up 50% of the share of like people talking. So, so you get to distribute the other 6, amongst, another. It's 5 minutes each, basically. So, yeah.
But let me kind of ask a follow-up question, though. I know you were asking the questions.
Oh, it's all good.
But like, what's your opinion on the state of meetups right now? Because there's been a lot of consternation about kind of the death of the meetup scene post-COVID. It's like, we're here, there's the opportunity to get together again, and yet people are still very nervous for obvious reasons. And so these meetups are starting to reboot, but the attendance is really low and speakers are reluctant. And
I think like it's good. There is that factor, but I do think that there's this desire for in-person meetups.
Yeah.
I think there's this need. That's why like I'm constantly pushing for in-person meetups, as much as again, like I don't want to like spread COVID, but at the same time, it's like people want to see people in person. They want to make connections to people in person. I think like Zoom meetups, it's too much of an inclination of like, you're going to be doing this and something else, right? Like you're not going to be meeting, like actually connecting with people. You're gonna be like doing this and 1,000 other things at the same time. And I think having that like focus moment of like, oh, I'm here with people in real life is really nice. So I just did one, I think last week I did a happy hour, and I think like 22 people show up, and
it's cool.
It was fun. It was a lot of fun. I mean, hopefully be doing one in the Bay here coming up. And I think you guys do plenty of events as well.
We do a lot. I would say that what changed for us is, so, I mean, we used to like actually, I guess the pre-COVID, the before time version of the meetup, which I call it the meetup sandwich. So it's like the networking, the presentation, the networking after, right? That seems to have gone away. I think, so what we're doing now is like any presentation stuff that goes on, that's a virtual meetup, because I think presentations really lend themselves well. And the thing with COVID is you got to know so many people, like international, data people. I got Bill Inman speaking at my meetup next week, right? So it's like, that's cool. Chad Sanderson's going to be, at the October one, but that's virtual, right? So that's a different gig. But to your point with happy hours and like lunches and stuff, that's more what people want right now, is what I'm guessing. We did an in-person meetup to talk about the book, and that was a lot of fun, but what I noticed is a chemistry. I love your opinion, what you saw, Ben and Matt as well. But like, I almost didn't want to have a presentation because I felt like people were just having more fun talking to each other.
Yeah, agree. And actually, Joe and I attended. So Ethan Aaron, who's the CEO of Portable, ran a couple of happy hours actually in Manhattan. I think he's been doing them once a month. Just, what does he call it? Like a low-key data meetup. And I went to one of those.
Yeah.
And Joe went to one. That was a lot of fun because you actually got to connect with people. There were actually people there from a lot of different scenes, not strictly just data, kind of everyone data adjacent, just chatting.
You got like data adjacent, you got finance, you got like the old guy like passed out at the on the side of the bar, closing it down at night. So it's it's a good mix of people. So shout out to the NYC crew too. We'll be back actually speaking of meetups. So we'll be at speaking at Matt Turk's Data Driven NYC on October 11th. So if you're in the area, come meet up with us. Yeah. You won't regret it.
maybe you'll regret it if you're the old guy in the corner.
You might regret it actually. Yeah, true.
But yeah, no, I think that's the other aspect of it, is like, I think people don't necessarily want to be like, I think we've had, and I think this has been like the interesting zeitgeist since the data summit. Everyone's like, can we not have another thing that involves a vendor selling us things? And it has nothing to do with like against vendors. It's just like that was so vendor heavy that we're like,
which one you talking about? Data Summit or account?
Yeah, Data Summit. Yeah.
Data Summit. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Vendors
everywhere. Did you not feel that? Maybe that was just me, or
which summit? The
Austin one.
Austin. Oh, Data Council.
Data Council. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. No. Which one? Is there like it makes me like Snowflake Summit and Data Council, and they had a kid, and it's just a whole bunch of vendors. No, I heard it. I did make it down to Data Council, and I did hear it was like pretty much, if you like hanging out with other vendors, it was a great time.
Yeah, and again, it's nothing against vendors. It's just like one of those things where, you know, we want to hear people speak. We want to like talk to people who just are trying to solve problems in a very real way versus like, you know, someone who's a vendor who's like trying to solve other problems. So yeah, I think that's like the interesting thing that everyone's like wanting right now. It's like, I want to hear like, what are actual people doing like in the day-to-day? Like, how are you dealing with XY problem, whatever it might be, data governance, or, you know, managing all of your DBT models or something of that nature, and improving that situation a lot more than just being like, oh, here's another solution that could solve your problem. It's like, well, that's true, it could, but at the same time, how are people actually implementing it? So I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, reInvent felt the same way too. Yeah. That was I went there, and I was glad I just kind of walked in for some, I don't know, I have a way of doing things. But what I noticed was there were no customers. It was just vendors talking to other vendors across the carpet. And that, if you bought a booth there, I felt really bad, because it's like, you know, again, if you like talking to other vendors, that's your jam. That's what you get comped on, then cool. I don't think you do. I think you get paid by talking to customers. So yeah, you're right though. It's good just talking to people, practitioners. I mean, because it feels like the forums for doing that now is like Reddit, you know, social media, stuff like this, and it's changed. But you know,
I feel like maybe the vendors are kind of desperate for attention right now. I mean, I think they've been getting a lot of attention, but not in person. It's been very hard for like salespeople and marketing people to get in front of people physically. And yet I feel like paradoxically, they'd all be a lot better off to just take a step back and say, hey, we're sponsoring this social event. We're Snowflake, we're DBT, we're whoever. We're here to sponsor, but you guys go do your thing and talk. Like, we're not here to message to you. Go talk to each other. You'll probably settle on our solution anyway, eventually.
Yeah, I think a lot of vendors are taking that approach now. Yeah. But it was just more interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting, but it's kind of like we're living through, you know, a moment in history. You know, it was just kind of getting back into things, and you know, and before COVID, obviously, we didn't have a video, right? So they kind of changed a lot of stuff, and people just adopted the format. I'm reading what was it, Neil Postman's "Amusing Ourselves," really good book. You should read. But it's an interesting book. It was written in the 80s, but it talks about how, you know, the printed word for the longest time was sort of how people, you know, thought and communicated. And, you know, sort of Marshall McLuhan's, you know, the medium is a message to a different level. He said the medium is a metaphor. And, you know, then he basically talked about how television was going to like rot everyone's brains and, you know, turn us into just a different way of communicating. But what I find interesting is like, you sort of apply this to how people work and how people interact, and you know, video and whatnot just kicks that up to 11. So you know, just it's, and from a, you know, I think from a purely like sociological point of view, I'm very just observant right now and very curious to see what happens. So it's not the same world that was here like almost 3 years ago. So yeah.
Roman, did you guys start your consulting company? You guys started way prior to code, like the whole thing.
2018. Yeah. So yeah, about 2 years. Yeah.
I
guess it was about a year and a half or so.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's like impacted like maybe like either the talent coming in or even just like the work that you're doing, or?
What do you think that?
It drove, like when it hit, it drove a big reassessment and kind of reorientation for us at the time. Because I think we were looking at more hiring. We were looking at a variety of things.
An office,
yeah. Like, it's like, what are we going to do now? Which that happened to a lot of people. And then it's like, okay, it's okay. But we kind of focused in on a handful of clients, and it was just the two of us for a long time.
Yeah, but it was scary though. I think in March, you know, like nobody knew what was going on. So, you know, everyone just slashed budget, which meant slashing lots of people. I mean, you can only look at the unemployment. I remember the first time you saw the unemployment graph, it was amazing, because I was like, is that they misprint that as like the y-axis, the x, and it's like, no, that's how much it actually dropped, because it was like literally the same length as the x-axis was. And so things were pretty gnarly, but then what was weird is a few weeks later, a lot of the companies that had laid people off, they started rehiring them. So like, oh, never mind, we're actually seeing more business than ever. So if you can get back, that'd be great. But a lot of people were just like, yeah, I kind of like this actually. I don't need to go back to your office anymore. So have a nice day.
Yeah. Do you like, in terms of like hiring data talent, do you feel like it increased it, decreased the amount of the ability to like find people that have the right talent?
You made it harder.
Oh.
Seemed to. Yeah. I mean, my impression is that anyone who could find talent, once we got like 2 months into COVID, it was like, all right, I need a better picture of analytics. I need to hire anyone I can. And especially with the rise of remote work, someone who would stick with you because you were a good company in Salt Lake City could suddenly find a job in the Bay Area, right? And so, or if you're in the Bay Area, you could find a job in Salt Lake City or whatever. Workers became very, very mobile all of a sudden. And so, yeah, it seemed like there was this huge shortage of data engineering talent all of a sudden. Is that your impression as well, Ben? I mean, I think we all kind of talked a lot about the data engineering shortage over the last year and a half or so.
Yeah, I feel like though, like there's always been a weird data engineering shortage, right?
Yeah,
because the role itself is such a, like, not obscure, but just a role that you pick up like doing the work versus, like, oh, I'm a software engineer. Well, you probably had a CS degree or background in some sort of technical degree. Whereas data engineering is like, how did you get here? Well, I started as a data analyst, or I started as a data scientist, or I started as whatever, and eventually fell into this. So I feel like the path is often less like clear there. So that's why I feel like sometimes it's always been hard to like find data engineers. Also, I feel like data engineering has always kind of been this interesting middle child where we're just kind of forced to, or we're just subjected to whatever software and data creators create and whatever data scientists and data analysts and business want from us, right? Like, oh, we want this report. Well, it's like, well, we can't give it to you. We'll have to talk to software to like start tracking something that they're not already, not tracking. So
yeah, and we saw the same thing with machine learning too. I would say like a lot of companies. I mean, that's how Matt and I got into it. I mean, my background's analytics and ML. We call ourselves recovering data scientists for a reason. And I think a lot of that, you just sort of saw that, exaggerated during COVID because all of a sudden everyone suddenly has data needs, and but it's not like the order of operations had changed. Right, like the need to build a foundation was still there, and so I think we did really well during COVID, I would say, and there's a Daniel Beach. What's up, Daniel? He's got a good comment, quick question here.
You want me to put that up?
Yeah, I do feel like COVID, like a bunch of people coming into data engineering. Yeah, I think so. Well, there's a couple of threads to this. I think you saw a lot of people coming into data in general. And so what was it, 2020, obviously the DICE stat where data engineering was the top IT skill. I don't know what it is now, but it's definitely, of course, we all sit in our own echo chamber too, like us. Yeah. And then Daniel's written a book as well in data engineering. You should go check it out. But, all of us, I think have a vested interest in saying that data engineering killed it during COVID. So yeah, huge rush of people into it. It was amazing. Yeah, nothing like it.
There seemed to be booms in the data startup scene for sure. That kind of ran parallel with the crypto boom and the NFT boom. There seemed to be this weird era of data extravagance that maybe is what led to all these sky high.
Data extravagance?
Data extravagance. It's like the 1920s of data ware people were just throwing all this money into Snowflake accounts and like.
Who's the Great Gatsby then?
I haven't taken it that far yet. But it does. I mean, and I think some of our friends have like called this out quite a bit on LinkedIn about how there was just all this money splashed around on the.
But that was like everything though, right? I mean, it was like kind of the everything bubble too. Yeah. I mean, but it was interesting just because I think a lot of what I find is there's an inverse correlation between the number of data startups and the number of just ensuing bad practices that led up to the need for those data startups. So things like observability and quality, like stuff that, you paid attention to back in the day, but because you modeled your data better, you probably didn't have the issues, but you also didn't have as many people probably asking for data either as you did back in the day. But yeah, it's interesting. But fast forward to today, that the environment seems to have changed. So
Yeah. Do you mean more on the funding side, or also like are you seeing kind of, do you feel like there's a drop in like overall demand for data engineering, or?
I don't think there's a demand, and I don't think there's a drop in demand. If anything, because I subscribe to a number of like job postings, right, just to kind of see who's hiring, as probably anyone the consulting space does, to see where the activity is. And it feels like, if anything, it feels like there's just more need for data engineers. Again, this is all anecdotal. I don't know. I mean, but then if you look at how BLS defines like data engineering and other jobs, it's like I did a thought experiment one day to figure out how many data engineers there were in the United States. Good luck with that if you're going off official government statistics, for example. It's like, I think things are miscategorized. And if you go off LinkedIn, for example, it gets even weirder. If you type in data engineering, people, number of data engineers, it's kind of all over the place. In fact, I think the total number was less than if you filtered on like India.
Yeah.
So their numbers are just like all over the place. So speaking of data quality, but it seems to be growing. I don't see it shrinking. What do you see?
Is that a me question?
Yes, you. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
the general you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it constantly feels like the need for data engineering is only increasing because, and this is the one thing that probably maybe is like the thesis of a lot of VCs, is like, everyone that quotes that quote about like how much data is being created every day, right? You realize that like on top of that, the complexity is increasing, and add complexity plus increasing data plus, more companies that want access to it. It just means people need to figure out how to answer that. So I think that's just constantly pushing for a combination of companies and, individuals that can then, take raw data that is, not useful and put it into a format that anyone can ask a question to, right? Like, everyone's trying to get to this mythical self-service analytics state that we've been trying to get to since like 2008, probably prior to that. But
yeah, I remember the prior.
Because I just remember, like, so I did like a whole like look back at like Tableau and like seeing them reference self-service back in like 2011, and I'm like, man, companies are like selling hard on that concept now, and they were selling hard on it back like a decade plus ago. So clearly, we're just forever in this perpetual cycle.
I mean, you've had self-serve analytics for decades. It's called Excel.
Or Power BI, right? How long has Power BI been around?
Since like the 1800s or something,
yeah,
right? So it's like a long time.
The Industrial Revolution, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but in all seriousness, like Excel to me has always been self-serve BI. I mean, in self-serve analytics, it's like literally was built for that. And I can't count how many times it's like, let me see, how do I get data? Oh, ODBC connection into ERP or something like that. I mean, this stuff has been happening for ages, and it sucked, but that's kind of what you had. And the thing is that the best data teams I've seen still to this day, most of them are using Excel. I mean, best in terms of delivering real value to a business. Like, they didn't need anything fancy. It was just a spreadsheet. So, but they knew the things that I think made them different is they knew the domain, they knew the data, they knew how to like, drive the needle with the business. Right. Whereas now we're so fixated on tools. We're talking to somebody, just a bit ago about this. Really, it's I'm not going to name who it is. Pretty big, but like they're going to buy a data warehouse first, and they have a data warehousing team. But as I start digging into kind of underneath the hood, I'm like, I think the team needs kind of more upskilling, just in basic best practices. I think you buying a tool is more, maybe do a few things first is what we'd probably recommend, but it's easy to buy tools, right?
How do you recommend, I guess, people approach that? Because I'm sure you spent a lot of time, when you're writing the book, thinking about this. Like, how do you recommend people like upskill their employees in such a way that they're ready for having all this data prior to like being like, let's invest in a data warehouse?
I think you do want to basically lay some foundations in terms of training before you make the transition. I think sometimes we're fond of saying that technology doesn't really matter. I think technology actually does matter. I think that you actually really can get a lot of more mileage out of Snowflake than you can out of older, less flexible on-prem solutions. But you can also blow through catastrophic amounts of money. And so it's really critical to like decide, what are my goals actually with this data? If I just throw everything into Snowflake, I can spend a fortune and not get much value. How do I even define my data stack? Like, does my team know what a data warehouse is? That's something that came up on this call that Joe was referencing today. And the answer in this case was no. And it wasn't really clear what they were trying to accomplish. They had problems with like just basic ETL stuff that they were struggling with. And so I think as you're making these big technology transitions, you also need like a people and process transition in parallel to leverage the tools.
Yeah, I would say almost. Yeah, I mean that's foundational to a lot of stuff. But but who wants to do that, right?
Right.
It's like, yeah, I mean, because for your resume, what's going to look better? Like I know a lot about data and I know how to use it, or I have like Snowflake, DBT, whatever smorgasbord of brand names on there, right? So
yeah. We continue to live in a world of resume-driven development in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. But I wrote about this in our secret newsletter last week, where it was turneradata.com/newsletter. Go get it. Actually, we'll be moving it pretty soon to a more searchable format. But what we wrote about was really the people process technology continuum, where it feels like a lot of the struggles that data teams have more to do with on the people end, just a lack of awareness of like best practices, just how to think about data, like how to see data in an organization, how it's used, how to communicate with the business. Like these are all like the foundational things, right? Getting requirements, talking to stakeholders. Like this is the people part, which I argue is the most important thing. I mean, the number of data, and then we'll keep going down, I think, in order of least importance, because when we talk about most importance, this is also where we see most things fail, right? Then once you have that down, figured out your requirements, cool, processes. How's your data architecture, data warehousing, whatever not talking about specific technologies, but like does your team have a playbook for stuff like orchestration, for example, storing data, querying it, et cetera, modeling it, quality. Again, not focus on technologies, like just do you understand what these things mean and how as a team you're going to do them? And then once you have the people process part, you're going to kill it with technology because you're going to know what you need. All too often what happens is the exact opposite. It's like, oh, let's focus on the tech first, and then we'll focus on the process behind it. And then we're going to figure out our business requirements fine after all that. It's completely ass backwards.
Yeah.
And this is the order of operations because we always see if a team's budget gets cut, for example, right? It's because you weren't working on anything that stakeholders probably wanted you to work, or you're too slow to deliver it. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting because like we've kind of gone a step back from like you guys are quote unquote recovering data scientists, and we've gone a step back from at least that, right? Like before it used to be like, let's do data science, and that was like, forget all the infrastructure and the tools and how we're going to set this up. We just want data science. And now we've kind of only gone one step back, which is like, okay, we need to build a data warehouse. Okay, Snowflake is that data warehouse, and DBT, whatever. But like really it is going back even further and be like, yeah, but are our teams even built on a foundation of like the right people, right processes that can support all of this other stuff we want to do? Or are we just like hoping that the tools itself will get us there? Kind of feels like the world we live in right now.
Well, it's a world we've lived in for a while. I think it's just, what happens in technology is it's sort of the pendulum swing, where, Matt, I'm sure can talk about his experience, as a data scientist and as a recovering academic as well. But, I've seen the pendulums go back and forth, and it's interesting when you talk to a lot of the old timers in the field too. It's like the pendulum, was, there was a time in the late 80s when data warehousing was actually, Bill was telling me this. Bill Inman, he's like, yeah. When I first came up with the idea for the data warehouse, everyone hated it. It took years for it to get traction. He's like, nobody would want to talk about this at all, right? And so, what he said, it was a snowball effect. It just, you had to accumulate the interest over time. And now, data warehousing was big, and then around the big data era and so forth, and NoSQL. It's like I remember countless conversations where people were saying data warehousing is dead, SQL's dead, right? Where are we now? Right. Data science is going to take over. I remember, very prominent people, in the data science field were saying that machine learning was going to take over analytics, and there would be no analytics. BI's dead too, right? Matt, you got something to say on this, Matt?
Oh, a couple of things. I mean, I think one thing that is fundamentally different in the era of Snowflake in the cloud. So there's definitely a pendulum swing from like centralization to decentralization. But as Joe is fond of saying, a lot of these tools let us do dumb things really fast, right? So instead of having to like sign a contract in advance and make a dumb purchase decision for several $1 million, maybe I can now like that afternoon have it up and running and blow through,
Yeah, but it's like getting tipsy at the slot machines in Vegas, right? Like it doesn't seem like it's a lot of money up front, several thousand pounds of quarters later in the slot machine, it's a different story. So,
yeah.
But what happens is it's kind of like the vendors, right? So if you're at the slot machines, they keep bringing you drinks, same kind of thing. It's like, oh, you're doing great. You'll hit it. Don't worry about it. You'll get the jackpot. So.
Yeah, I feel like
never happened to me before, but
never. I couldn't figure out. Like I went down to the slot machines in Vegas, and I was just like, it seems like too much of a hassle. I'll go to like an ATM and like, nah, which work. I'm already out. Cash?
Smart.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, you're smart. I don't gamble either, for full disclosure. So.
Only on NFTs.
Only on
yeah, right.
Web3 is the one.
Web3 influencer. Yeah.
No, I feel like I feel like a lot of people have probably written something like, it's like low code, whatever solutions don't let you don't solve your problems. They just let you create like messes faster. It's like, I get time to mess is like 3 days, like 3 minutes. Like immediately I have a cobweb that I've developed. So it's very funny.
Yeah, there's a lot, but it does come back to the identifying the problems you're trying to solve, though, right? And that's kind of the learning to see that I've been thinking of a ton. I'm going back and reading a lot of the classics from actually lean, and lean thinking. And it's interesting because I'm seeing like people like Ben Stansel's, his articles lately have been about kind of quasi supply chain related, right? So why are we pushing data? Why aren't we polling? Because polling stuff, like literally polling, is what you do in a lean environment, right? And and so it's cool seeing that lean is what inspired DevOps, Agile, and everything else too. So it's just cool seeing like the classic ideas being popularized, repopularized, and reused for other purposes, but because it works. So.
Yeah, I feel like we're definitely going into like a phase of like data governance and data management, and all these like more traditional concepts are kind of like being maybe pushed more to the forefront, both in like solutions, but also I feel like in practices where people are like, maybe we need to think about this a little bit more. I hope, right? Like and maybe we can find some middle ground, or maybe we'll swing too far to the other direction, and we'll be back in the world where we have committees that take 4 weeks to make a decision on changing the data type of a column. I don't know, but I do feel like we're kind of everyone's trying to like at least voice towards hey, maybe we should focus more in this other direction, right? Like you've got Chad Sanderson and all these people who are kind of I think pushing in that direction.
I think it's cool. I don't know. What do you think, Matt? I mean, what do you think about the zeitgeist right now?
I mean, I think the idea of data ops is a very, very good one, right? In some sense, DevOps was intended to do the same thing. It was to like rein in this free-for-all dev culture that led to like very inefficient deployments and people building code on their laptops that couldn't be deployed. And so I hope in practice that the data ops practices are good enough at some point that we kind of control this whole mess. And I hope we can build data modeling into those practices as well. But it seems like this is still work in progress for most organizations right now, right? Like some companies are doing it extremely well. I think that's the exception for the moment.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, but I think, the interesting thing is, a lot of has changed since, data modeling practices back in the day, like dimensional modeling when that was introduced, and, Data Vault and so forth. Like you got streaming now, you have, events and machine learning and stuff that just wasn't really popular. I mean, actually, Dan Lindstedt, I was talking to him about it, the guy who wrote Data Vault, and he said that actually when he created Data Vault, it was actually an event-driven architecture, an event-driven approach. I thought that was pretty cool. He described what he did, and I was like, holy cow, that was very impressive, especially for the 90s. That would be impressive today, what he did. So, but so I think, so the modeling techniques, though, I feel like it needs a refresh. And I think it also, with data mesh, I've been thinking a lot about this, where we were actually talking with Kent Graziano on our show today about this, where, data modeling and data mesh, how does this work? Because now you have different domains and different data models. How do you communicate, definitions and, relationships, across different domains. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
So if you aren't doing it good for one, I mean, how do you think you're going to be doing it great for like an end problem, right?
I feel like that is the concern mostly with data mesh for most like more traditional like data warehousing people. It's like, well, why do you not what if you can't, like you just said, like if you can't do it good for one, like how do you expect this to be done well for another? I feel like, so for example, like when I worked at Facebook, we essentially had a data mesh. No one called it that, right? And I think that's usually the thing. No one ever calls it the thing that it is. It's always someone else that like looks at it and they're like, oh, this is what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
And the reason it worked there was because the application layer itself talked to each other, right? Like it's like, well, there are IDs that all connect each other with all these entities. So that's why this works, because you don't need to think about how these connect. You already know they're going to connect when you bring it into this analytical layer. But I don't think every company has that. And I think, that is like the major risk I imagine you have when you try to just do everything yourself. It's
how
like,
was that designed though? How did they come up with the idea of coordinating all these ideas across all these different systems?
Yeah, I mean, like I think that's just like in the nature of you, since you've built an application yourself. You can kind of build something that connects and talks to each other. Like that's just how you're going to build it across everything.
Yeah.
Like you have a centralized entity layer that essentially talks to each, as new developers come in, they're like, oh, this entity already exists. I either need to pull something from it or just use that entity that already exists rather than build a new one myself. Right. So I think it's a combination of just like, people constantly building on top of things that were built well. It's why I'd say like most people, like I make the joke that people that work at like Fangs aren't just spoiled because of free lunches, is because like the data that they work with is arguably in a better shape, just starting point, than most other places. It's not to say it's perfect. Everywhere has its data problems, but working at other companies where it's like, who knows how you can like connect all this data.
Oh yeah, now that you're consulting, you get to see what the rest of the world's like.
See what the rest of the world's like. And before that, I worked at a hospital, and that was like chaotic. Yeah. And like, oh, we'd like to connect this project management system to this finance system, and you're like, well, your ID field isn't like, you've got some IDs in there, but some of those are like budget numbers in there as well, and some IDs have like multiple, like ID number, comma ID number, comma ID number in one field. Like, I don't know how you want me to like really work with this. Like, there's not a really good way. So.
And it's running on some old mainframe, and it was implemented like back in the 90s by some consultants who were there for a year and then left.
Yeah, like Ben's dad. Yeah.
Well, my dad builds houses, so
oh, okay.
Simpler world to some degree. He's currently very upset because the city that he's currently building in made him build like a giant hole in the ground for drainage in the backyard. So he basically has a swimming pool that he doesn't want. But
interesting. Can you turn it into like a skate park?
He can turn it into a rain garden. That is what he can turn it into. So he can like put certain plants in it. But that's
expensive the rain garden.
Yeah, it's kind of what it sounds like. It's like plants are around a hole that are to make the hole look a little bit better, but it's a hole.
Oh man! Well, condolences to your dad. It sucks. So.
It's what it is. It's what it's like building. Yeah. In terms of like, I guess the data space, like what are you seeing in terms of like hiring? Like are you feeling like you're finding the right talent? Like what are you having to train people on when they kind of join your team, or when they were joining your team, or how things are switching up?
I mean, we're kind of moving out of the whole services thing. So I'd say our hiring profile is a lot different than a lot of other people. Like if we were to hire, it would definitely be more probably senior level, architects or data engineers and that kind of stuff. But yeah, we actually out of the services game at this point. So I guess they're called SIs by a lot of the companies. But yeah, but I think it's I still get hit up every day. I don't know what you guys see, but like on LinkedIn or on an email, like, hey, check out my resume. I'd love to come work with you. And the resumes look pretty good, but yeah, it seems like there's no shortage of people looking, but probably no shortage of people hiring either. I don't know what the bar's like.
Yeah. And I think more generally, we're looking for people who like are senior, but can also train. And then it turns out that's a very hard mix to find. And I don't know if you've ever worked with like any of the super big training partners for AWS or GCP, but what tends to happen is people with experience just get dropped into this role. And they might or might not be actually good at it. So like, I think you found your calling, Ben, on YouTube, like basically doing your own training for an online audience. I'm a bit curious if you can talk about it, what things are like internally at Facebook, for example. Do they have a big internal training program? Do they take senior people and turn them into internal trainers?
Yeah, I was trying to think. So one, they give you a month-long boot camp. So that's one thing that's kind of nice. I remember when I came in, like I was so like, you know, whenever you start a new job, you want to like be productive. Like you're like, I got to be productive. It's like my first month. I got to like do something. And basically the first month, I tell most people like, don't worry about being like productive in terms of like producing output. More than likely what you're going to spend your first month doing is just like sitting through some classes. Now, sadly, it's like online. Back then it was like literally, it felt like college. You would like sit through the main campus and you basically sat in what felt like college classes. So there was that. I think the other thing is like Facebook leans to trying to hire people that will just figure out problems. Like I think that's what they try to like push towards. It's like even in the hiring process, there's certain things where they're like you might have a question that you're asked, and I remember like asking a question to the interviewer, like, oh, something about the data. Like I just asked them something like, well, why don't you query it yourself? It's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. I can just query the data myself. So like I queried it myself and like answered my own question. And I think Facebook really tries to like focus on hiring people who are just going to figure it out themselves rather than like someone who's going to come over and be like, oh, I have a question. It's not saying that they won't like try to train people, but I think they're trying to like lean towards those people. And that's my opinion. That's not like an answer from like some document. That's just what I felt they were doing. So
well, it echoes what I say. There's one guy, the dog park down the street, who works at Facebook too, and he works in the finance department. But he's like, yeah, we have to query all of our data. It's like, you do? Like, yeah, but who doesn't do that? It's like most finance departments don't do that, but that's cool. So because he saw I had a Presto shirt on, he's like, Presto, we use it at Facebook. Like, I know you wrote it there. Yeah.
So. Yeah, I found that like I remember when I was talking to my friend who worked at Amazon. This was like when she first started, probably like 8 years ago. She was a financial analyst, and like the first thing she said her boss did was like hand her a SQL book. And I was like, learn this, you know, like this is your job now. And so I have found that I feel like a lot of the big tech companies do expect, even like I shouldn't say even an analyst, but like, you know, you can't just get away with Excel, right? Like I feel like most of the companies you can get away with Excel and ODBC connection at best. And SQL is almost like, if you have it, great. If you don't, you can figure out something else. But I found that at most of the bigger tech companies, it's like SQL is an expectation. It's like, well, you should hopefully know some SQL. Yes, the data engineers are there to help. They're there to like build data sets. You are there to like then query those data sets. And that's your role. So that's what I've kind of felt.
Well, it's probably also like the data sizes and just the volumes are probably much greater at the big tech companies versus, a lot of the traditional finance firms, for example, right? Like accountants, for example, like I wouldn't expect your average accountant to know SQL because why would you need to know that? You probably pretty good at Excel. So nothing wrong with that. I mean, I still probably have muscle memory of like many Excel shortcuts that, just because it's, but back in the day, you didn't have big data back then, and most people still don't. My wife, she works in finance and she's a whiz at Excel, but I wouldn't expect her to know SQL.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of from talking to people, I won't say who, don't want to get anyone in trouble, but a lot of Facebook's like financial accounting and billing is done with SQL, as I understand it, which is not generally the case, right? Like most places are not handling that volume of small transactions where you need to think in terms of big data just to calculate a customer's bill, where they might have, thousands of advertising hits or millions even of clicks and such.
Yeah, I didn't work for the advertising team, so I wouldn't know the complete answer. But at the same time, would it surprise me? No. I mean, I remember at the hospital I worked at, like there was definitely someone who was like there before me who set up a lot of like interesting accounting things through like SQL and VBA, and I'm just like, so this is just like going on. Okay, so this is how we're reconciling and sending like accounting. What they're supposed to go like in and out of certain accounts. Okay. Back then I didn't really think about it, but now I'm just like that was pretty like risky. Like you're taking on a lot of risk. Like you're not an accountant. You don't know what's supposed to actually happen in these accounts. Like you're assuming, but you have no idea. So I did always kind of feel like interesting. Like not then, but now I'm like interesting. Hopefully that's okay. But
On the flip side, we've seen similar issues with Excel, right? Where even people who are trained as accountants, if they have a mistake in their worksheet, might make a huge mistake on a quarterly report or something like that, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, what was it? Even HBR 10 years ago, they had an article that said like, what was it, 80-90% of Excel reports had errors in them.
Yeah.
I believe it.
So. Well, in the case of, I think it was, I don't know if it was Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns, but when they were like selling off all their like terrible assets, there's like this case where these lawyers just like printed out this Excel document to like whatever accounts where they were this other bank was going to buy. And they printed it out, and there was some hidden fields. And when they saw it on the screen, they didn't see these hidden fields. But when they printed it out, they showed up, but they didn't double check, because at this point, like, whatever, there's a 100-page, you're going to buy this document. And then whatever bank said they were going to buy this stuff had to buy this stuff. Like, they literally went back to the court and they're like, can we not buy this? And they're like, nope, you signed it. You're buying these assets. It doesn't really matter. So there's like a whole, like, if you look up like Excel errors that have caused issues, there's like millions, if not, I think in a few cases, billions of dollars caused of like companies having issues because of
I believe it's more than billions. Yeah, probably a lot of billions.
Yeah, so
money's probably going somewhere else, huh?
Going somewhere else. I mean, sometimes it's just like there's like some misreporting that has happened. I don't remember which companies it was, but like, they reported one number to like literally, your quarterly earnings to the public, and then like a month later had to recant it and be like, oh, actually it was this, and it's less, and then their stock obviously was like,
yeah. So it's interesting. In the last chapter of our book, we kind of muse in the future of data engineering, and there's actually there's a section of it that talks about spreadsheets, because I'm like, if you want to know what, okay, so it's funny, right? Like we deal with a lot of companies using the modern data stack, and what cracks me up is when I see like a C-level making a decision off a spreadsheet, may not even come from the data warehouse at all, and then you're just like, okay, so what's this thing being used for? Because he just made a decision that's going to drive the company, and apparently none of y'all provided him anything for the decision. So we call it kind of Excel's like spreadsheets are like the dark matter of data when you get down to it. It's just everyone uses it. And so what we're kind of thinking and hoping is that, a lot of these systems, or maybe some new startups, take advantage of the fact that, as much as we all like to think that data is being done, in the modern data stack or whatever, it's like that is not reality at all. Most people are doing stuff outside of these systems. Maybe they're pulling data in, maybe they're not. But the thing is, the interface itself is a spreadsheet. That's just the reality of it. I'm not here to say that it's great, but it is what it is. So I just, but what's interesting is you see a lot of these startups again, like, hey, like we have a data dictionary and all this other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? And like, that's going to be used by your analytics team, who probably works with like a small percentage of the business. The rest of the people in the business may or may not be using that at all. So it's a game of whack-a-mole. Like, you have all these errors, as we pointed out, in spreadsheets, right? These happen, and it's like there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, no, I was just gonna kind of add to that, where it's like I feel like I've like, you don't want to like become resigned to it, but it's like you almost just have to admit that it's like that's just how the world works. It's kind of like being like, oh well, like Power. I think Power BI is kind of a great example, where it's like, oh man, you can do all this stuff in Power BI that you should, in theory, be doing in the data warehouse, right? Like whatever, data modeling, things like that. But it's like, and you could sit there and try to be self-righteous and be like, this is the wrong way to do it. You should do it this way. But it's like, but things happen, right? Like, but they're making decisions off of it. It's working. Are you going to fight it? Like, can you fight it? And to some degree, the answer is like, no, it's just going to keep happening. You can sit here on your little pedestal and think there's a better way, but you have to admit that something.
It's actually a big throne that we're sitting on. So
Iron throne. Yeah. All the data errors cutting you. Yeah.
No, but you're absolutely right. It's like, you're not going to solve the problem of like, drunk driving or
using Excel.
Power BI is equivalent to drunk driving, according to Joe.
Yeah, fentanyl use or anything like that. Yeah, it's got similar societal consequences, but it's but it is what it is, right? And I think that's what you're saying. It's just it is what it is. So,
I mean, I think until we give people a more compelling solution, that's where they're going to keep.
That's just exactly right.
And there have been various efforts to kind of create this awkward shotgun wedding between databases and spreadsheets, right? Like Google internally, they called it Big Sheets, but they're like Google Sheets BigQuery connector is an example, and it's awkward, right? It's like, this is cool, but it's also very awkward. And so the question is, can we come up with something in the future that sort of merges capabilities of Power BI with Excel with the database, is like more intuitive for people who are not, that don't want to be in the guts of databases, but it is closer to a database experience. and it shouldn't just be like a scaled up spreadsheet. I think that's the key answer. And if someone could solve that problem, like that's kind of like the next Visa Calc, right? Like that's the next wave in terms of how people interact with data. I feel
Is it Visa Calc or Visa Calc?
I don't know. It's probably Visa Calc. I have no idea. I just read about it.
Visa Calc. Okay, it's like a credit card calc.
Yeah.
Is that the startup you two are founding
next?
That's
right. Yeah. Visa Calc.
Yeah. We're actually resurrecting it.
That's right.
I think Aaron. I think it's a good question here. From Matt.
You mean the anime Aaron Yeager? Could you summarize the difference between database engineering and data engineering? You guys, any thoughts? I mean, I can give thoughts, but
yeah, I mean, database engineering could mean a lot of different things. I think we've all sort of claimed that the term data engineering to generally apply to analytics at scale, mostly. Even though in principle it could apply to a lot of other things too. That's kind of what we've claimed it for. I don't know. What do you guys think about this?
I mean, I think as you point out, database engineering can mean a lot of things. It could mean that you're actually like writing a database from scratch, and for some sort of open source project, or a closed source project in the case of a lot of companies. That could also mean that you're a DBA, but that is typically a more of an administrative role, right? So it's I think engineering is more, I would say, you're building, right? Or, versus, being an admin. But yeah, that's how I distinguish it. And data engineering really is more, I think how we define it, it's lifecycle management at the end of the day. Like, you're taking data from source systems and making it useful for downstream consumers, like data scientists, analysts, and, and general business applications, right? But, but the use case is typically, along the lines of doing something with data, with non-transactional data, right? So that's typically where data engineering is versus database engineering. But sometimes data engineers do database engineering, and sometimes database engineers do data engineering. And so, I'll give you a thoroughly confusing answer to a somewhat confusing question. So,
yeah, I think Facebook just released like a Coursera meta backend.
Velox?
Huh? What?
Oh no, sorry. Never mind. You got me off on a different tangent.
Yeah, so. What? Mark Zuckerberg doing MMA? No.
That was pretty funny.
That was those. I at first I swore that was like a deep fake. I'm like, that can't be Mark. It looks actually decent.
It's actually gonna be the first metaverse game where you get to go fight Mark Zuckerberg.
If you win, you get to become king of Facebook. No, but I was gonna say Meta came up with like a database engineering certificate, and I think I looked at it and it looked more like a traditional database, like OLTP transactional database, not data engineering as much. Whereas like you said, data engineering is the assumption, I think, is generally it's analytics. Although some places will definitely interview you on like OLTP concepts. I've definitely had that
interesting. Aaron had a follow-up comment about it specifically on the Metabase. So yeah.
I feel like I read some of it, and let me. I'm gonna just quickly look at it because I thought I looked at it and I was like, it looks more like meta database engineering certificate. I thought for sure it looked more like MySQL and things of that nature, but I could have looked at it wrong. Let's see.
Well, I feel like part of this is a disconnect between what tends to happen at FAANG companies versus what's happening in the rest of the world. Like if I'm Google or Facebook, I have entire teams just working on my storage systems, right? And I have entire teams working on new transactional technology and on incremental improvements to query algorithms and such. And most companies are not doing that. Like most companies are going to buy Snowflake or maybe Databricks or something like this and have someone else do that heavy lifting for them. But if you're at the scale of a tech company, then it makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, just again, quickly glancing over it now, it looks like it's mostly geared towards traditional database engineering. Like the Capstone project is building something for like a web app, and I don't see anything that says something about analytics. So that's how I would read it. Is that it's more built for something like a traditional web app,
which I think is pretty cool actually, because a lot of these on the application side, it's typically been about so I was actually writing about this the other day. Just how even software engineers sometimes understand databases, but things like ORMs, for example, object relational mappers, they tend to, I would say, increase productivity at the expense of data models.
Yeah.
And data models, you think that, in Rails, for example, right? I can just write an active record, model, and should just work, right? But what you keep seeing often is like duplications of data. It's not third normal form. It's probably not even first in a lot of cases. It's just a big hodgepodge of stuff. But the data modeling techniques, even the software engineering, aren't there. So if you don't understand that, like, it's going to have performance implications on your database. It will. I've seen this happen a lot. And so, especially at startups, like just understanding like basic database engineering, for example, just kind of how they work that's a good investment of your time.
Yeah, I think we've gotten away with like NoSQL kind of databases for backends. And the interesting thing is like I think was it Single Store? I was like seeing Single Store say like they had an ad like, oh, is your MySQL like capping out? And I was like, y'all know that Facebook's entire backend runs on MySQL, right? There's no capping out if you know how to use it, apparently. Yeah. Like, I'm not saying I figured it out. Someone figured it out over there far smarter than me, like how to make sure it can handle.
Like Instagram, I think that's like a Django app or something still. They managed to like, do some tweaks on this. So, I mean, if you're engineering at that scale, like you'll make it work because you have to, for one, but two, but it's knowing your tools, right? Like at that point, you're hiring a database engineer who like understands the low level guts of MySQL and is tuning it. And like same with Instagram, like some of the stuff they're doing with because Django's a Python app, right? And so they were doing some interesting stuff with Python optimization, which is like that's like bleeding edge because they had to eke out like that level of performance because it was probably cheaper to do that than like gut out the Django app and start over, right? That's what I would have done, but it'd be like, they make it work, and so.
I mean, it underscores another thing, which is it's very easy to go in and try to optimize everything in an app, right? But for Instagram, especially early on, what was their big challenge? Well, it wasn't like the basic web framework. It was shipping all these images and now all this video. And so that's where their engineering is going, into those storage systems that are shipping the images. But the web app itself is simple enough that they can run it in Python with some optimization, and it's not a huge bottleneck.
Yep.
Yeah. Just to add that again, Facebook is still PHP.
Facebook
is still PHP. That's cool. React on the front end, but on the back end, it's called Hack, but
it works, right? It's making money. I mean, on the other hand, if it's running the metaverse, I'm starting to understand why the metaverse.
The PHP is going to run the metaverse.
The metaverse, maybe.
Yeah. That'll be cool.
It's a new meme, PHP metaverse.
Well, it's again, as long as I can go, fight Mark Zuckerberg, then actually he had some skill. Like he was like really flat-footed in that footage. Like I was like, yo, you need to like use your hips like once during this filming. But he didn't suck though, right? And they could have just caught him like after like the 100th take, like after he's like But he's props to him for doing that. I think it's pretty awesome. So
All right, so more just because this is a question. Why do you guys have any answers here? Why Snowflake is popular?
Because it's awesome. Full disclosure, we're a Snowflake partner, but we really do love them. So I will say in that I think we came into our radar around the same time, which is when they're first selling in Salt Lake. But the thing I realized about Snowflake from the very beginning is they just knew how to sell to enterprises. Like it was just like the way they pitch their product. It's like they had one thing to sell, right? At the time, it was a data warehouse. Now it's a data cloud platform, but tomato. But they had one thing to sell, and they knew how to sell it really well, right? Yeah. Whereas against AWS, for example, it's like if you're an AWS rep, how many products do you have to go sell at that time? Even a lot still, right?
Well, you also have to sell Redshift, which is
a Redshift, right? So Snowflake early on, the whole playbook was like take out Redshift.
Yeah.
But AWS reps sometimes, but I think it works out of the box. It just does what it does. It's good. Why do you like Snowflake? Or do you like?
I do like Snowflake. I think, like you said, it works out of the box. It works the way that most people would expect it to work. If you're like a traditional data management person, I think that's the thing, right? Like it's like you can tell the people who built this came from that background, right? Like when I compare it to Databricks, right? Like you're like going to Databricks, you're like, okay, this feels like a data scientist or an academic person built this for a very specific use case, and then shifted it over to, trying to do more data engineering workflows, and then the vice versa, right? Like Snowflake is now doing the same thing, where it's like, okay, it was built with that in mind. Now it's trying to push into the data science, data work, like data space as well. So it's this convergent evolution moment where they're like, we both want the same use case, and so we're now going to fight. Because for a while, I feel like there was even, I mean, there's still cases where people are like, I use Databricks to push into my Snowflake.
Yeah.
And that's just how some people like to do things. So now it feels like they're like, no. We want to be your thing. We are your data platform. There's nothing else. We are your thing. So yeah.
Yeah, they're on a collision course. I'm excited to see what happens. And what I'm also excited about is like what comes out of left field. Like Snowflake and Databricks is what's going on today.
Yeah.
I think stuff like what Jordan Tagani's working on over at MotherDuck, for example, like that's pretty dope. New query engines like Velox, it just can't, that Facebook just announced or Meta just announced, where it's like that's their new query engine, like, all this new stuff coming out, DuckDB in general.
The whole concept of local databases, right, is just exploding. I mean, I think I counted like 4 or 5 announcements on Hacker News of new databases that run with WASM in the web browser.
WASM is a big one. I wouldn't be sleeping on that.
Yeah.
That's going to be cool stuff. So, I mean, I think for Matt and I, that's what we're excited about when Matt and I talk about this stuff, which is often because we're nerds. But we're talking about like this kind of stuff, like the Snowflake and Databricks stuff. I think it's great, but that's like what's going on today. That's the thing I tell our partners too, among the companies we just talked about, which is all of them we just talked about, but it's like the things that I would be paying attention to. Sure, your immediate competitive threats. Look at that. It's the stuff out of left field that's going to come at you that you won't be prepared for.
Yeah.
Well, look at Redshift itself. I mean, just a few years back, Redshift was the hot new thing, and no one had really heard of Snowflake. And that's because if you came from like running your own Oracle system or your own Hadoop system, Redshift was so easy to use. Like it could do all the stuff we were used to, but it was just turnkey. And then all of a sudden, Snowflake swooped in and said, oh, well, we're like Redshift, except that you don't have to pay for us 24 hours a day. You can spin up compute on demand. Like we're way, way better. And so, yeah, again, what comes next where it's like, Snowflake is kind of passé now.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely where I'm trying to see like, okay, where are things in 5 years, which obviously I think that's a hard thing to guess, but yeah, because 5 years ago we were all thinking Hadoop and Redshift, maybe not 5, maybe it's like 6 or 7 at this point. Who knows? I might be losing track of time, but yeah, back then it was like Hadoop, Redshift, this is where the world's going. And then, Snowflake was like quietly kind of like making its moves. And it was like, okay, whatever. And then suddenly somewhere in like 2019, 2018, it was just like, okay, Snowflake is where everyone wants to be now. Whatever shifted it, I'm still kind of, it's still trying to like, what was the real shift? But yeah,
I think if, we write about this in the last chapter of our book too, we call it the live data stack. And I think this is one area where things could be heading, where you want to pay attention to is not the current list of vendors. That's interesting, but that's interesting to understand today. Where you want to look at are actually the peripheries, software engineering on one end, application dev, and machine learning on the other, right? And then event-driven systems gluing everything together. Like to us, this is actually the other area where it's the feedback loop between applications, machine learning, analytics is just going to get tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter, to the point where I think data engineering actually has a potential to go away. In the sense where it'll just be maybe an intermediary, but maybe so much, but sort of sitting in between, sandwich maybe. But the thing is, like software, if you look at kind of where software is going right now, it's there's some pretty cool stuff happening with that. Like single store, you bring them up. I actually think that is one possibility of like sort of that paradigm. For databases is sort of what you'll be dealing with. I mean, look what Snowflake announced, Unistore. Right. I mean, transactional workloads. So this is a taste of things to come. But the feedback loop between like events, machine learning, back into the app, it changes the nature of reports. Analytics, I think, is going to change a lot.
Yeah.
So it's exciting to see. But yeah, sometimes what you pay attention to is not what's in front of you. It's to the side of you, or behind you, or below you.
A lot of different places. Matt, do you have anything on there?
Yeah, and I think the rise of unstructured data is also going to be really, really important. I was actually writing about this the other day, and that is that if we're so good at machine learning, then why are social networks still using things like hashtags and likes to figure out what people like? Like that shouldn't be necessary. And so I think we've made huge advances in machine learning. I think there's a lot of stuff coming that's going to just completely sideswipe us, honestly. Like, it will be such a massive improvement. And in some ways it's exciting, and in some ways it's kind of scary too, right? Like, what will social media be able to intuit about us from all the videos we post on TikTok or whatever?
Funny you should ask that. I don't know who used to work at a social media company, but
no, exactly.
I know very, very little. I worked on like periphery teams that did not like touch any outgoing data. So I have very, very little knowledge. I know internally maybe what we were tracking about people that worked at Facebook, but no, you know, anything else. So Facebook's massive, right? Like everyone always asks you like, oh, do you know this like one person? You're like, there's like 80,000 people between contractors and like full-time employees.
It's a city, basically.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when we talk to our friends at Google, it's like, you know, we're hiring like 1,000 people, what, a week or a month or some crazy number like that. It's like, I don't know how you keep up with everybody, but
yeah, our onboarding every week, I think, had a few hundred people. Like, it was,
wow.
Yeah. I mean, like, but going back to like being spoiled, it's like, that's when you realize the difference. Again, working at a hospital, like where it's like, it took you a week to maybe sometimes even get a laptop that functioned, and then another like a month to get like access to everything you needed, where it's like day one, oh, your phone is synced, your laptop's synced, like you have access to whatever you need. Like there's no like, you know, none of the like, let me go ping a billion people to like get access to everything. So
I met one of my friends at the Chelsea offices in New York City, and for Google, Chelsea offices for Google, maybe it was like this at Facebook, but if your laptop was misbehaving, you would just drop it in a bin and then pick up another one and open it and sign in. And
I was there a few weeks ago. They had like a tray of just laptops. Exactly. You could just take one and just, it's a different world.
Yeah.
But that's cool.
Let's see. So, I mean, maybe we can answer a few questions before we sign off. But let's see. So, best skills to learn to become a data engineer, SQL and Python are what come to mind. But what else?
I think so. On the one hand, you don't want to get too hung up on specific frameworks or technologies. That's always dangerous, right? Like if you're not going to hurt yourself by learning Snowflake. At the same time, you could easily land in a job where they're using BigQuery or Databricks or something. But I think what is helpful is to get experience with a spectrum of different frameworks so that you have transferable knowledge. So in other words, with orchestration, maybe your employer won't be using Airflow, but if you learn Airflow or Prefect or Dagster, you're going to have some like general orchestration skills, and then you can go learn whatever you need to learn on the job.
I think taking a step back too, I mean, I think questions like this are interesting because I think that the acceptable answer for us would be, yes, you should learn SQL and Python. But as we wrote the book, I think what we needed to do, you know, the reason we wrote the book was really to focus on, okay, so over the next 5-10 years, like what's more unlikely to change, right? So that means avoiding talking about specific technologies, right? So if you take a step back and understand, okay, so the context in which I do my job as a data engineer is what, right? Lifecycle management, you know, whether that's ingestion, whether that's something about source systems, you know, that you ingest from, whether that's storing data, you know, querying and transforming it, and ultimately serving it. Like if you understand those paradigms, you're going to know much more easily what tools go where, what's appropriate, you know, for your situation. And I think that's where I suggest starting. The other skills I would say to become a data engineer, learn requirements gathering, learn how to talk to stakeholders. This is like the most underrated thing, but what will set you apart from other engineers who are focused on, I think, the more tactical stuff. Like, oh, I just want to know about SQL or Python. Again, that's good. To me, that's table stakes. Like, yeah, you should know SQL and you should know Python. That's like day one stuff. What you know, what's going to set you apart early in your career is like asking good questions. So when you're talking to a stakeholder, say, okay, so what's your expectation for what this will do, right? This report or, you know, what pipeline or whatever, right? Like when you're building something, it's like your dad, right? When he builds houses, it's like, you know, sometimes people ask you to dig holes, but other times he builds a house and, you know, but let me ask you this. If your dad was building a house, but he didn't ask any questions to his customer, what do you think that customer would say?
Well, they'd probably be unhappy with whatever was at the end because they'd be like, this isn't what I had in my brain.
Right. Yeah. It's like, so it's a house you built for yourself, right? You didn't build it for me, who asked you to build the house and hired you to do it. And that's very much the mindset you have to have as a data engineer is understand, okay, so what do people want? and knowing the question behind the question. To me, that's important. I've been in this game for a long time, data that is, and it's like what I've seen makes you successful in your career is certainly tech skills is appropriate for sure, but I think that gets you maybe 5-10% of the way there.
Yeah,
really good engineers are actually really good at asking questions and working with people.
Yeah, I think that's like, early on, I think it makes sense obviously to lean heavily towards tech skills, but probably within that like year or two, it's like, okay, now it's like, and obviously you should start when you're just getting started to get used to asking questions, but like definitely if you're not starting to ask good questions in year two, it's like that's kind of what starts separating people between like, oh, are you like going towards that senior mid level, or are you just going to stay, someone that does the work that someone else basically figures out for you to do. So yeah. Let's see. Okay, I have a side project where I'm building a data product and I am running into issues trying to find the right tech stack. Where can I go for advice?
We'll be slightly.
Go to Matt. He'll help you.
Go read our book and we talk about choosing tech stacks, because I think without some context here, it'd be hard for me to make any.
This is like the impossible question to answer. Yeah,
but I think we do try to lay out some principles for choosing tech stacks, because I think this is something that gets overlooked in our industry quite a bit, right?
It's true.
Everyone is an advocate for something, Snowflake advocate or BigQuery or Spark or whatever. It's like, yeah, but what if I'm starting from nothing and I need to choose for a specific application? How do I even think about that problem?
Yeah. Well, but it comes back to asking good questions.
Yep.
Right. I think at the end of the day, it's just like, what are you trying to do? And what are your constraints? Right. So is it budget? Is it time? Is it working with other teams? And you're saying you're building a data product. So what's this product supposed to do? What's the, and the other question too is, what's the definition of done?
Yes.
Right. So what's good enough to get this data product out the door? So these are the questions I'd be asking. And then I think that'll help you. The stack will present itself to you when you answer these questions. It's normally not the other way around. If you come into it from a technology first angle, where I'm going to build a data product with these ingredients being like, typical modern data stack tools, for example. I think that's a way to set yourself up for failure, because you haven't addressed the core question of like, what's the data product? What am I doing? Right. And so that's where I would start. So
yeah, I like the what is done. I feel like I've recently had some instances where like, yeah, it's like there was just no definition of like what's done. How do you know when you're ready to start pushing and getting people to look at it? Because if you don't have that defined, you just kind of keep circling forever because it's not perfect. And
the thing is, data is never done. That's the problem.
It's true. Yeah.
Right. And here's the difference between software and data is, software is it's features, right? Like I'm making a feature, for a product, it gets, pull requests, gets, released, pretty done there, right? Data is a weird thing where data keeps growing. And so the definition of done for like a report, for example, is actually never done because the nature of the data changes. Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. Sorry, done is definitely harder.
The person asking the question. It's like, oh, it's hard work. And you'll never be done.
It's impossible. Don't bother.
Yeah. Just don't try.
Are you answering this question? Can you give advice about transitioning to a software engineer or from a software engineer?
I hope that's not my advice.
Oh, I mean, I've worked as a software engineer before. I think that's what I did before data engineering. So I had this, but back then I think that the role of software engineer that I did would be called data engineering now, but it predated the term. So I would say, software engineering is interesting in that it provides you. So I always like to have MMA analogies, which I was really stoked to see Mark Zuckerberg, doing his thing, but yeah, I think like software engineering is sort of like the wrestling of the data world, where it's like you got the tech chops to kind of take it wherever you want to go, right? Mm-hmm. Like, now it's just understanding. You just got to understand data, and that's the one thing where I'd say like software engineers, are notorious for maybe understanding the data they need for their app. You got to realize this is not the same thing as making like a quote data product. Like you have to think about data in a much different way.
Yeah. Got to know how to actually finish it. You can't just do the takedown. I don't know if that's where you're going with.
No. But yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like when I used to do a lot of jiu-jitsu, and you get the wrestler coming in. And the thing with wrestlers is like, if you don't have a wrestling background, just let them take you down. Just let them do their thing until they wear out, and then you can sub them. Or if they make a mistake. But yeah, they're good. they're good. Once they learn how to move in jiu-jitsu, it's you're dangerous.
It's a good combination. It's a very
really
good
good
combination.
Did you used to wrestle back in the day?
I wrestled. Yeah.
Nice. Cool.
Yeah. So yeah, but like you said, I've done my fair, like a little bit of jiu-jitsu, and you always run into the same problem. It's like, okay, I took him down. Now what?
Just lay on him. It's fine.
Just lay on him. You gotta pin him, right? For like 3 seconds, the game's over. No. Oh, I also have to worry about like if I do a single leg takedown and my head's on the outside, he's gonna just come like take, and lean back, and then suddenly I'm like tapping, even though he's on bottom. What in the world?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive. I'm trying to get Matt to go to jiu-jitsu. That the climbing gym we go to, they have a jiu-jitsu all the time. Nice. Yeah, Ken G really liked it when he was out here. So
nice. Joe's kind of notorious for scaring some of our friends who visited us here in Salt Lake City. I won't say who.
Nice. You guys got a few more questions, or you guys got to check out?
Yeah, we can go for a bit more. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so
good questions. So
I think this will be interesting. More like, so in terms of like highlighting impact for data engineers, how do you recommend people kind of do that, especially for like performance reviews?
I feel like this is getting easier, but a lot of it is going to depend on the company culture, right? If you can work on some kind of a big data project or data product, if you have a leader at the company who's very interested in like delivering value out of data, and you could be part of the core of that and saying, all right, I worked with this data science team to deliver this specific data pipeline, which moved the needle in this way, then you're going to be visible. It's challenging though, because not every company has that culture, and not every corporate leader is willing to actually dig into that possibility. Even though you talk about being data driven, it doesn't always happen in practice.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think it's always like interesting trying to highlight value. I always just try to make sure I'm getting as close to the business values as possible, as well as the data engineering work. But for some people, I think, they're more, I think, even more low-level data engineers, where they're like, I want to like be the one that like builds the data platform. Oh, what's going to come up here? What's this book?
Well, no, you talked about value, and I actually thought one of the best definitions ever was from this book called Lean Thinking. It says on page 16, the critical starting point for lean thinking is value. Value can only be defined by the ultimate customer, and it's only meaningful when expressed in terms of a specific product. So, it makes a lot of sense. But we overcomplicate value in a lot of cases, right? Like all of us talk about, we got to add value to the business, and then it drives me insane. Like, or vendors say, you need to get more value out of your data. I'm like, I don't think you understand what you just said, and I don't understand what you just said. So it's interesting, but I thought that was a good one. So it's lean thinking, banish waste and create wealth in your corporation. So very riveting.
When was that book written?
It was written 1887. No, it was written when was this? 1996.
Okay, bring back the classics. Let's see. So going back a little bit more, I think towards college student era. Any advice for data engineering projects a college student can put on his resume or their resume?
This is something we all talk about, right? Data engineering portfolios and projects. This is interesting. Okay, so here's the deal with data engineering projects too: is they're a bit like, it's like showing off your plumbing project. It's like, I don't know, it works, then it doesn't leak. So, and you can't really see it because it's behind a wall, right? So, but in all seriousness, I think maybe if it's a cloud-based system where you're connecting different pieces together, maybe make a video of that. Mm-hmm. You can't really, make a Terraform script or something, that shows how you could spin it up. But the more important thing is like describing the steps that occur in this project. I think learning to showing that you can communicate in a written and oral fashion, or through video, I think all these are really important. So I'm looking at a project, I want to see not just what you did, but like, how do you communicate what you did? Yeah. What do you guys think? I mean,
it's a tricky problem still. I mean, Ben, I think you've spent quite a bit of time on this on your YouTube channel, haven't you?
A bunch of half-finished videos. My entire audience reminds me. I think I just posted. I tweeted something like, stop starting, start finishing," and someone's like, "Is this a quote? Is this like a note to yourself about data engineering project
projecting
series?" I'm like, "Wow, thanks for calling."
Ouch, man.
it's really it's one of those things where it's like you start them and then like you just get busy with other things. So you're like, okay, I'll just do these like not filler videos, but videos that don't take as much time, right? Like, 'cause like if it's high level, it doesn't take as much time to prep and things of that nature. So you're like, okay, I'll do this, and then like suddenly it's like 3 months down the line, you're like, oh yeah, I had that video series that I don't. Do I finish this now, or do I just let it kind of sit there and no one will bring it up, and then everyone occasionally brings it up? But in terms of that, I think the nice thing is there are a lot of opportunities that you can do things with that data. One, I know of companies that have like built entire $1 million products, not like hundreds of millions, but like $5 million, $10 million products where they just like scrape data from like online sources that are difficult to go through, like government sources, kind of create it and then sell it back to like legal company, like lawyers and things of that nature, just so that it's easier to access. And you could argue there's like a data engineering aspect to that. Or just like building a basic dashboard or building a basic Twitter bot that like posts every once in a while. I think there are ways you can show it off that kind of, make you a more well-rounded person. And then also, again, going back to that value concept, like making you start thinking about that. It's like, what would people actually want to see at the end of the day? What would people actually want to use at the end of the day? Oh, a Twitter bot that points out where Elon Musk's plane is. That's an interesting.
It turns out that's popular. Yeah.
So
they make a lot of money too, just by him paying you to shut it down.
I feel like Elon Musk never did. I think he was just like, no, I'm not going to pay you $50,000 to shut this down. So. Oh man. All right. Maybe let's see. Maybe we try to do one more question, and I apologize for everyone who doesn't get any questions. I just don't want to keep everyone for all day. Are there any like horror stories that you would like to share that you've learned from back in the day?
Always lots of horror stories.
Lots of horror stories.
What's a good one to share? Just have to figure out how to anonymize it appropriately, or whatever.
Yeah, I've definitely come into plenty of horror stories. I feel like that's like the unavoidable truth of being like someone that's doing consulting. Like there's like the happy world where you come in and it's greenfield and like you build whatever you want, and then there's the other world where it's like the reason they're calling you is because this thing is a problem, and when it's a problem and no one knows how to solve it, it's a real problem, right? That means people have looked at it and they're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I would say, it comes back to something I was talking to a couple other people about today. I think the data horror stories are often more stories about, a lack of, people or process foundational stuff, right? Again, back to the conversation we had earlier, it's easy to focus on technology, but I think when you start seeing problems result, around technology, that's a symptom of something that actually happened in a bad process or, on the people side. I've never seen, anything fail because of technology alone.
Yeah.
Right. It's always something happened that caused that to happen. Technology is basically inert, but it's like either you didn't know what you're doing with it. It's a process question. Yet, you're building the wrong thing. So I'd say that horror stories I've seen have just been like data teams getting dismantled because they weren't adding quote value, right? Again, value is something that's ultimately at the eye of the customer attached to a product. You were building the wrong stuff or you didn't deliver it on time. That tends to be, I think, where data teams get gutted. In fact, I know, I had some friends today get laid off from one of their companies, and these are all great engineers, and I wish them well in their job search. But, at the end of the day, it's for whatever reason, I don't know the specifics, but the company felt like this is kind of how we got to go. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, it is what it is. So these are the horror stories I think that we see often, especially in consulting, right? Like you say, it's not like you come in when things are going great. It's you come in when somebody needs help.
So. Like the Bobs in Office Space, right? Like one of your favorite movies to quote, Joe, mine too, where they're there to like be the employment consultants or whatever, the HR consultants.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's kind of what you're doing to data, right? It's like, oh, things have gone south. So either tell us to shut it down or help us to make some sense of it.
One of my old bosses actually, he he's still a friend of mine, but he used to be one of the Bobs, not literally in the movie, but like his job was to go around firing people all day. And he said it was like the worst job he ever had. It sucked. Yeah. So anyway, fun times. There's actually we have the question from Zazil is interesting. Or however you say it. I'm going to answer that one real quick. I think.
Which one's? Oh, okay. Let's do it. Okay.
Yeah.
That is a good question. That is a very good question. So in principle, going back to the whole discussion around Snowflake becoming more of a centralized platform, maybe data platforms mature enough that like there really is a one-stop shop that will work for most people, where it's like, okay, this is actually good enough where I can pretty much use the tools inside of this like little ecosystem and get done most of what I want to do.
You're describing Informatica.
I mean, yeah. So we're just moving back to Informatica. I mean, yeah.
Well, what's funny is there's a person who just joined and made a comment, Meet, who's very into Palantir, and like that's like when you look at that, like it's like, oh, it's an all-in-one, basically like Foundry is just an all-in-one stop in terms of like modern data stack. I mean, in fact, up until last week or like a few weeks ago, I was like, I thought it was the other way, where it was like, oh, Foundry's like kind of imitating modern data stack, and then I was like, oh no, I see a lot of the opposite connection where everyone who's come from like Palantir is very well vested, some one way or another, in modern data stack kind of.
Oh yeah, I think I know a few of the people there.
So it's that is true. So it's like I think Snowflake would benefit from like becoming this like one-stop shop where it like kind of integrates all these tools for you, and then like is that like Apple, right? Like it's the Apple Store.
Well, dbt, I suspect is going to go a similar route. It's no secret that their package ecosystem is growing a lot and incorporating a lot. But at the end of the day, and Matt and I joke about this when I mentioned Informatica, but it's a running joke with us that it's one of the laws of the universe is eventually a platform becomes Informatica, right? But here's the deal. I don't know if it's you or somebody else who posted a while ago, but how much money Informatica makes each year. It's pretty insane, actually. Like they make as much, they were making as much as Snowflake at one point, and then but it's nuts. But this is sort of the inevitability of, like I said, I think everything in data happens in pendulum swings.
Yeah,
here, right? We went decentralized, and everybody was having bespoke stuff, but eventually consolidation happens, and then it happens until people get tired of that stack and they go back the other way.
I mean, the comment I would add
came out, that was like DBT was just another open source project. I remember when it first came out. I didn't think it was going to be anything like it is, but what are you saying, Matt?
It met a need, but my comment about Informatica would be that Informatica has always paired itself with other databases, right? Like it was ETL data quality, but to be frank, if Snowflake like really succeeds in this project of being a true one-stop shop where you don't need another vendor, that's like a lot of power in one company's hands. So it's going to be interesting to watch this battle.
Yeah, I don't know. They always try and say that they're not going to have like do the data integration, all that, because they had like their partner ecosystem and stuff. But we'll see.
We'll see. I feel like I was just thinking about this with like data or Snowflake tasks. I'm like, why don't they just make Snowflake tasks like DBT? Like, well, that would take like nothing. It's there.
Not terrible, right? Just like make them a little bit better.
Make it a little bit better. Give it a UI. And I'm like, what? Exactly. Probably because they're invested in DBT. Like, duh, they have money in DBT. So why would you like try to like take it away? It's
the best advertising for DBT right now.
Yeah. What's your other option? Snowflake tasks. I had another similar conversation today about like with another tool that Snowflake's invested in. I'm like, yeah, maybe their idea is just because like they're not connected to everything very well. Like they have other options that you could connect to, and I'm like, maybe their theory here is like, yeah, you could use the other data sources, but they don't work as well. So why not just use Snowflake? I'm not saying that's their goal, but it's like obviously it's like, but why not? Like that's obviously in your prerogative if that's what you want to do.
I mean, if you think of the prisoner's dilemma, the calculation though, right? I mean, inevitably you will compete with your allies. That's what makes sense. And so that's inevitably how it would go, unless you have a good reason not to, unless the payoff is like such that you're better off leaving them alone. But at some point but you're going to see, I think you're going to see a lot of consolidation happening. I think this is also how you're going to feel like, depending on who buys who and how that M&A works out, maybe the duct taping is less of a thing. So it should just all work seamlessly. But everything used to work pretty seamlessly because you would just buy from one vendor.
Yeah, back in like the Oracle SAP days, it was just all one thing. But it still came with like $300 an hour consultants. So I think that's the unavoidable spot is like, look, just be that consultant because they will always be there regardless. Oh man, it's very hard. Data is very hard, I think, and maybe like you said, we'll get to a point where it's just all in one place, and we don't have to do as much transformations and integrations, and you just do data sharing in between different data stores. Honestly, I'd like that. I think most data people would like that. It's like, oh, you take away a lot of this annoying, boring work, sure. We can focus more on the ML data science work. Okay, I think a lot of people would prefer that. Honestly,
I was thinking about this though, and it's like the questions that have been always asked in data are the same ones that have been asked since I got into it 20 years ago. It's like, do I trust the data? Like, am I getting what I need? I mean, these are basically just the basic question. Like, it just comes back to, are you delivering what people want? It's and do I trust it? Right? If you can nail those two things down, then of course. But tools, I would say, make it easier, but also makes it easier to do dumb things too. So it's a trade-off. But that's why you're seeing, I think, a resurgence of things like data modeling now, because there's a backlash against like kind of promiscuous practices and just letting it flow. And now it's like, well, maybe we've got to have some discipline around this. It's Kit Graziano was talking about today on the show, is discipline, right? Yeah. We're talking about how he's a taekwondo master and discipline with that, and discipline in data, and I can break boards with your skull.
He's also a data warrior, right? For this reason.
Yeah, the guy's awesome. So.
That sounds fun. All right. Well, I don't want to keep you guys all night, so I think we can probably call it. We probably missed a few questions, and I apologize, but I really appreciate everyone that's shown up. Thank you guys, Matt, Joe.
Anytime.
It's really great talking to you as always.
Yeah.
Anything you guys want to say before I hit end broadcast?
Just go buy our book, Fundamentals of Data Engineering. I don't know, Matt, do you have a copy of it handy?
I do have a copy, as you can see. My
oh wait, Ben has one too. Actually, he got an autograph.
And it is back when I saw you guys.
That's funny.
The signing.
Yeah. So go get the book. It's doing really well, and hopefully it helps. The nice thing is, what I like about these conversations is, all of us are, making content and whatnot around data engineering. But the cool thing is, it's not a 0-sum game, right? Like we can all, all the ideas are, they multiply on each other, and hopefully that helps the community. So,
yeah.
We can all charge $300 an hour, basically. It's the idea. Fixing other people's messes.
Sometimes I come into a mess and I'm like, yeah.
It's not worth it.
Yeah. It's like $300 a minute.
Hazardous duty pay. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you guys again. I'm
take it easy.
And let's see.